So the Emirates Polar Program is a big umbrella program. It handles a lot of different things, including policy, science diplomacy, international multilateral engagement, and that's at a very, very high level, right? But part of that is also research. And KU is, as I think many people will know, or maybe they don't know, is really the preeminent hub of research in Abu Dhabi and in the UAE, really.
Course, yeah.
We are really moving leaps and bounds ahead, and we have in the last decade to advance the scientific agenda in the UAE. So when the Emirates Polar Program was created, they looked at the national landscape, and what they saw was that within KU, we had a capacity of scientists, a larger cohort than any other university, of people who have been working or have worked in the Arctic and Antarctic. So, for example, the chairman of the Department of Earth Science, Dr. Muhammad Ali, was part of the ANDRIL program, which was a drilling program in Antarctica where they took a very big core in Antarctica. And this was, more than a decade ago, basically. And so he's been to Antarctica. So even the chairman of our department has been to Antarctica. Professors like Dr. Diana Francis has an instrument deployed in Antarctica. Myself, I've done work in Svalbard. I've also done work in the Andes. And I have been pushing to do some work looking at this very specific interval in time in Antarctica. So we had this core of people who wanted to work in the Arctic and Antarctic. And so they saw that core and they saw that research potential. And so the KU was gifted with managing this center, and this center is a national center. So the center isn't just for KU. It's actually for the whole of the UAE. And the hope is that as the center grows and develops, at the moment it's still very young, it's still being nurtured, that we would bring in more of the community within the UAE to engage in scientific research in the high Himalayas, as well as in the Arctic and Antarctic, to move the science and research agenda forward.
Welcome back to KU Pulse, the podcast. My name is Maggie Kinsella. I'm your host for today, and I'd like to welcome our special guest, Dr. Aisha Alsuwaidi. Dr. Alsuwaidi is an associate professor in the Earth Sciences Department here at Khalifa University and was instrumental in the setup of the Emirates Polar Program. She's here to share that with us today.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That's great. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be part of this.
Well, it's nice to have you. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background to start with?
Yeah, so I'm an earth scientist and I work on really integrated systems. So what I look at is how the climate has changed through Earth history and how long that takes for it to happen, and then how does our planet respond to that change. So we know today that we have a lot of CO2 going into the atmosphere, and it's largely as a result of human activities. And we know there are some responses to that in terms of global warming, in terms of sea level rise. But this isn't the first time in Earth history that this has happened. It's happened many times in the past, but due to natural causes. And there were very, very long-term changes that occurred related to that, including extinction events and changes in our oceans. And very specifically, and why we're interested in the cryosphere, what we see is that at high latitudes, or at the North Pole and the South Pole, the Arctic and the Antarctic, at these times in Earth history where we had these big changes, we lost all of our ice, or we had no ice. And so my work is really about how long things take. How long does it take our planet to recover? How long does it take our planet to respond? And that was how I kind of got into really looking into high latitude records, what we call high latitude records, which are these polar extremes, and also the high mountains, because we mustn't forget the high mountains.
We mustn't.
Yeah, so that's what I work on in a nutshell. And I use a bit of chemistry, and I use a bit of biology, and I also use a lot of geology, so looking at the rocks as well.
Well, that's actually a nice segue into the beginning of this, because today we're here to talk about the Emirates Polar Program. Can you share a little bit about how that evolved, your involvement there, who the key players are, etc.?
Yeah, so the Emirates Polar Program is a program which comes under the International Affairs Office of the UAE. And it really came out of a desire of the UAE. You know, we have these missions to Mars, putting satellites into orbit. So we're really exploring the far reaches of our solar system. And I think you've spoken to Dr. Rami, or you're going to speak to Dr. Rami, and he works on the solar system, but he will be the first person to tell you that, yes, we are really looking at the solar system, but we're not looking at our own planet effectively. And so this program was born out of a desire in the UAE to build scientific and engineering capacity in the polar regions. If we can send someone to the Mars in the UAE, why can't we send someone to Antarctica? Just because we haven't done it doesn't mean that we can't.
Right.
And the UAE, as you may know, has had a long program of looking at climate change. And because climate change really affects us,
Yes.
we sit at a nexus in the planet in terms of sea level rises are going to affect us, water shortages are going to affect us, changes in our weather patterns and heat regimes are going to affect us. And the Emirates Polar Program comes out of this notion that what happens in the poles doesn't stay in the poles.
Right.
And so water shortages in the high Himalayas or changes in glacial dynamics in the Arctic or Antarctic are going to have really profound impacts on us. And so the UAE had this desire and this agenda to move a scientific and engineering program forward in the polar regions. This was a government side part of that. And the scientific side of that was that we as scientists here in the UAE who wanted to work in these regions didn't have a path forward to work. Because especially in the Antarctic, it's governed by a lot of treaties that protect the Antarctic. And we weren't part of those treaty mechanisms. So there was a desire in the UAE to demonstrate that, we work in a peaceful capacity and we work in a collaborative sense. And, that's called multilateralism. And how can we support scientists internationally working in these regions? And how can we build this scientific and engineering capacity here in the UAE? And that's where that program kind of comes from. So it comes from the International Affairs Office, which is part of the Presidential Affairs Office. Right. And so it's very high level. And it's really looking at how can we support the societies living in the Arctic. There's a lot of people live in the Arctic, a lot of different cultures, which are really vulnerable to the climate change that's happening there. So how can we use our scientific technology and our engineering to support those people and enhance studies? And also, how can we engage in Antarctic research and the third pole, which is very important to us here in the UAE, because the third pole is the Hindu-Kush Himalayas. It's the water tower of the world. It's that water that comes from those high mountains supports billions of people living in Southeast Asia. And so that is really critical for us because the UAE gives a lot of support to humanitarian aid and disaster relief globally. And obviously that's right on our doorstep. It's an hour away to fly to the high Himalayas.
Right.
And so if there are things which are going to impact them, they're also going to impact us, and they're going to impact people. And there is a desire within the Emirates Polar Program, not just to think about this as science for science sake or technology for technology development's sake, but also the human component of this.
Right. So protecting ourselves, protecting others.
Exactly. And protecting others and protecting the people around us in an effective way. And the best way to do that is really through science and scientific engagement and bringing the public into the scientific discourse. Right. And so this program stems from this, really this sense of we are part of an interconnected system on our planet. And how can we contribute to that? As to contribute to investing in humankind, the future of humankind as well.
So that leads into then part of this Emirates Polar Program is the KU Research Polar Center, of which you're very involved. Yeah. Can you tell us about that?
So the Emirates Polar Program is a big umbrella program. It handles a lot of different things, including policy, science diplomacy, international multilateral engagement, and that's at a very, very high level, right? But part of that is also research. And KU is, as I think many people will know, or maybe they don't know, is really the preeminent hub of research in Abu Dhabi and in the UAE, really. Course, we are really moving leaps and bounds ahead, and we have in the last decade to advance the scientific agenda in the UAE. So when the Emirates Polar Program was created, they looked at the national landscape, and what they saw was that within KU, we had a capacity of scientists, a larger cohort than any other university of people who have been working or have worked in the Arctic and Antarctic. So, for example, the chairman of the Department of Earth Science, Dr. Muhammad Ali, was part of the Andril program, which was a drilling program in Antarctica where they took a very big core in Antarctica. And this was, more than a decade ago,
Right.
basically. And so he's been to Antarctica. So even the chairman of our department has been to Antarctica. Professors like Dr. Diana Francis has an instrument deployed in Antarctica. Myself, I've done work in Svalbard. I've also done work in the Andes. And I have been pushing to do some work looking at this very specific interval in time in Antarctica. So we had this core of people who wanted to work in the Arctic and Antarctic. And so they saw that core and they saw that research potential. And so the KU was gifted with managing this center, and this center is a national center. So the center isn't just for KU.
Right.
It's actually for the whole of the UAE. And the hope is that as the center grows and develops, at the moment it's still very young,
Right.
it's still being nurtured, that we would bring in more of the community within the UAE to engage in scientific research in the high Himalayas, as well as in the Arctic and Antarctic,
And
to
what
move the science and research agenda forward.
And what an educational opportunity for the students here as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really great that people like myself or, Dr. Diana or Dr. Muhammad Ali or Dr. Rami are engaged in the polar regions, but we are not young.
Yes.
And we
fair
are
enough.
not the future.
Yeah.
So we can train the future, but we are not the future of this program. The future of this program is those young scientists
Right.
and young engineers who want to come in.
Exactly.
So a key component of this has also been integrating cryospheric research and cryospheric courses and material into our courses. And in fact, they were there already. So I teach a course on natural disasters and hazards, and that course has a huge component on glaciology because that's an important part of our natural systems.
Yeah, absolutely.
My colleague, Dr. Franz Ossa, whose student also went to Antarctica this year, but on a different mission to Dr. Rami, he has been working on glacial processes on our planet going really far back in time and at periods where our whole Earth was covered in ice. And so that empowering the next generation in this arena is really critical to advancing this program. And it's not just the students, it's the public. Because as I said before, what happens in the poles doesn't stay in the poles.
Yeah, absolutely.
It affects everybody.
Exactly.
And so the educational component of it is really a national educational component. And it starts when kids are very small and it goes until,
And it's
you're very
critical.
old. Yeah,
It's critical for the survival of the planet.
exactly.
For our survival. It's been quite a decade for the UAE in terms of scientific development. Their involvement in the space program has really progressed. And in 2024, the UAE's accession to the Antarctic Treaty. Can you speak a little bit about that? What is the treaty?
So there are actually lots of treaties related to the Arctic and Antarctic regions. But the Antarctic Treaty and the Antarctic Treaty System is probably one of the most critical ones. Everybody knows where Antarctica is. It's this huge continent, this big ice sheet sitting in the southern hemisphere. But what very few people know is that the majority of people who go there are actually scientists. They're not tourists.
Right.
They're scientists and then penguins, right?
Yep.
There's lots of penguins in Antarctica. The treaty process is basically a process by which all nations who want to work in Antarctica agree that they are doing so from a scientific perspective, that we're not going there to blow up ice or to remove ice or to mine for gold or
Take
to
over
look for
territory.
hydrocarbons or take over territories. Antarctica is really a continent that belongs to everybody on the planet. And it's a very sensitive place. If we think about the ozone hole, which many people, young people maybe don't know about, but older people do because it was a big thing, especially when I was a teenager, that ozone hole sits over Antarctica.
Right.
And that hole, it has an impact on our energy budget, on our planet, how much sunlight we get, how much UV we get, UVA, UVB. And I think young people will know about those because sunscreen is a much bigger thing now.
Yep.
And that is all, that environmental processes are all happening over Antarctica.
Right.
And so Antarctica is very, very sensitive. It's sensitive in terms of ecological systems, climate systems. It's a very sensitive place. And so it has to be protected. And the Antarctic Treaty is the mechanism by which international bodies agree that they are going to do no harm in Antarctica. If you remove a rock from Antarctica, you have to have permission to remove a rock from Antarctica. If you're going to dig a hole in Antarctica, Antarctica, you have to have a permission to dig a hole in Antarctica. If you're going to put a building there, or you're going to take a building down,
How
you've
long
got to
would that
have
take?
permission to do that. So it's a very delicate ecosystem, and we have to protect it, and we have to preserve it, and we can only do that by studying it. And the Antarctic Treaty process is that process of countries saying, we will do no harm, we will protect Antarctica, we will study it for scientific purposes, and we won't do it. We're not going to damage it in the way that we've damaged other parts of our planet. And so it's a protection treaty, effectively.
Okay.
Yeah.
That brings me to the next part of this, the Emirates Polar Program. What I wanted to speak to you a little bit about is the United Nations Sustainability and Development Goals.
Yeah.
The ones that the research center is focused towards. We were just speaking about the educational side of it.
Yeah.
I think that was SDG number 4. I think so.
Yeah.
But in terms of like life underwater, life above water.
Yeah, so the cryosphere forms lots of parts of that, and largely what we're looking at is the life underwater and the life on land, effectively, and how that impacts our water cycle, especially as the very large glacier that sits on Antarctica and the ice sheets start to melt. And so that is a critical component of this, and really, again, I reiterate that the Emirates Polar Program is a program created in response, in a way, to climate change and what we see happening and how it's going to impact societies. But with the SDGs, when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they're all interconnected. So there are Sustainable Development Goals related to food and food security, right? And having zero famine, effectively. Well, you can't do that if your water supply is stressed.
Right.
And if you suddenly start to change sea level and you have lots of crops growing at sea level, that sea level is related to ice melting in the Arctic and Antarctic. So the center, the Polar Research Center, as well as the Emirates Polar Program, are really key in the UAE driving its sustainable development goals forward, especially in advancing our scientific capacity in areas related to oceans and our water systems, because our water systems aren't just the oceans, but they're also related to atmospheric processes and weather processes, and these are really affected as well by the Arctic and Antarctic, but also life on land. Right. So as I said, if the ice sheets start melting, the ice sheet on Greenland or the ice sheet in Antarctica, and sea level starts rising, well, you and I live next to the coast. Right. You come from British Columbia, and British Columbia is also right on the coast. It's a series of islands. So if sea level starts rising, even by a tiny bit, we are impacted. And so studying the ice sheets, which Diana Francis does, for example, or studying methane degassing as a result of permafrost, and permafrost is this kind of permanently frozen soil, and there are lots of microbes that live in it, and they produce a lot of methane. And methane is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. And we already know from satellite observation that a lot of methane is being released from these areas. And we don't have effective monitoring. For Antarctica, we have very little mapping. We know very little about Antarctic soils because it's covered in ice. So if we want to think about the SDGs and the interconnectedness between the SDGs, that's a nexus, and that nexus lies at the poles. And so the Polar Research Center is really looking at how can our research enhance or support research which is happening, especially because, the UAE we're a young country, and we have a very, very strong drive towards advancing technologies which benefit humanity. And so what we have to think about is, we don't want to be competitors in the scientific sphere. We want to be collaborators. So can we look at what other people have done and use not just science, but science, technology, engineering, computational capabilities, and the kind of advancements in sciences. I mean, as you said, we've done leaps. It's not just footsteps. We've taken huge leaps in the last 10 years. And can we take some of that and can we complement what's being done? Can we enhance what's being done? Can we improve what's being done? Are there new technologies we can bring to the table that improve Antarctic and Arctic monitoring, that will help the people who live, especially in the Arctic, where a lot of people live who, in many ways, there are Sami people, the Gwich'in people, all of these different tribes that live in the Arctic region are really being drastically impacted by climate change.
Well, and all of this kind of comes collaboratively.
Yeah.
So this is not one country that has the power to do this, or the technology,
No.
or the research skills.
Exactly.
It's global.
Yeah, and if we come back to the SDGs, those people who are living in the Arctic, many of them rely heavily on fisheries.
Right.
Fish is their primary source of protein. Fish and reindeers, right?
Exactly.
If the reindeer herds migrate because of climate change, because of warming in the regions where these tribes live, like the Sami people, for example, there's an impact on their food supply. So that's not just impacting life on land, it's also impacting food and food scarcity and food security.
There's always a knock-on effect.
Yeah, there's a balance there. And if we think about something like fish, we think about the oceans, and scientifically we still have a lot to learn about our oceans. In some respects, we know less about our oceans than we know about planets beyond our Earth system. And if we think about our oceans are a huge source of food for a huge proportion of the planet. And so if you have, we have these big, large circulations of nutrients which support life in the oceans. And if you start to affect those in one place, because it's circular, then you start to affect them in other places.
Exactly.
So if fisheries are affected for the Arctic people, then fisheries will also be affected for us here in the UAE. And if we think about ancestrally, the Bedouin people and the tribal people who lived here in the UAE, especially along the coastal areas,
absolutely.
they were fishers.
Yeah.
And they relied on fisheries. And so in our culture, our people, that's a big portion of our diet is fish.
Yeah.
And you can have fish farms, but fish farms sit along the coast. Sea level rise, nutrient changes, fish farms will be affected. So these things, these SDGs for the Polar Research Centre are all interconnected and interrelated. And they're very critical. And when we think about also the Antarctic Treaty process and what can we bring to the table, it's this big collaborative human perspective as well.
And they're incredibly well thought out.
Yes.
Like when you say they all impact each other. One of the SDGs that the research center aims to impact is collaboration and science diplomacy.
Exactly.
And some of the expedition teams have been talking about how incredible those collaborations have worked out for them in the research and how they learn from each other, even in the field. So scientists are learning how other scientists perform and do things in the field. And
we were very fortunate this week. We had a professor visiting who's done a lot of work in Nepal. And he really gave a wonderful case story about how he, as a scientist, was on the ground in Nepal, working with the people in Nepal. And he was planning to go back for a field season, and a huge natural disaster happened, a massive earthquake. And the people in the village who had supported him were completely devastated by this. But because of his scientific connections that he'd built up with these people, and it's not about science, it's about being human, it's breaking bread together, it's sharing, being with each other. He actually initiated some charitable organizations which then supported these people. So when we think about science and science diplomacy, it's about human connection.
Yes.
So Dr. Rami, who went with the Indian mission, and our student Omar, who's Emirati. So, we have an Egyptian scientist, an Emirati scientist working in the UAE, a country that has so many nationalities living and working together in harmony, going to a Indian base in Antarctica, where there are also other scientists from other countries, and you're there, you're in isolation, you're locked into this base. So you have to really become your own little UN of people who have to work together. You see these people every day, and they're asking you, what is the science that you're doing? Where are you coming from? Why are you doing it? Why, and
what
everybody's excited.
Using?
Exactly. And so it's
quite a Venn diagram.
Yeah. And then those people go back to where they've come from, and they say, well, I met this guy, and it gets people talking, and it fosters relationships which will in many cases last for people's lifetimes.
Yeah. These little collaborations, even the smallest one, can create a knock-on effect for further collaborations.
Yeah. They can have really a huge cascade effect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the Antarctic has been explored for quite some time now, and the UAE, maybe it's because it's a newer country, is a little late to the table. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Are we late to the table? That's a better question, because many people will ask, why are we even coming to the table? And we hear this a lot. We've heard this pushback, people saying, what role does the UAE have in the Arctic?
It's a desert
nation. What role does the UAE have in Antarctica? You're a desert country. You're far away from it. And we can ask the same question of countries like Turkey that have well-established Antarctic programs, or Italy that has a well-established Antarctic program. And the question is, are we late to the table, or are we at the right moment in the right time? We live in a world that is currently very divided by global politics and very divided by global opinions on climate change. And the UAE has always been a voice to come in and bring reason to this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And we've come into this, and we are part of meetings and international dialogues as part of the Arctic Circle Assembly. And I think the UAE just signed an MOU with the Arctic Circle Assembly. Mm-hmm. And the Arctic Circle Assembly is the voice for the Arctic region in many ways, because it brings together all the people across the Arctic. Right. The UAE is an independent voice in this. We are affected, as I said, by what happens at the poles. And so we care about what happens at the poles. Mm-hmm. We are a nation of a huge international country, right? The Emiratis, we are a minority in our population, but that's okay. We're happy with that, because it means our children are growing up with multiculturalism. Yep. And so we have had to navigate these complex relationships, and we are coming in at a moment when the world is divided. Mm. And the hope is that maybe we can start to bring people back together who haven't thought about collaborating for a long time, because we are coming at this fresh. So it's not a question of, are we late? It's a question of, what can we do now we're here? Yeah. Right? And I don't think there's ever too late to start doing something.
I agree.
Right?
100%.
It takes time in terms of science, diplomacy, and policy to build something. Mm. And we do that very quickly in the UAE, and we do it very effectively because we have incredibly talented people who support us. Right? And we can come in with fresh eyes, and we can come into this and say, this is what's been happening, this is what has been done, what can we do better? Or what can we do to enhance this? Or what can we do to improve this? Or bring these people back together on the table when they haven't been able to sit together for decades? And I think that's where we're coming in right now. And I think this is the right time, it's the right place. And, I hope we can bring some peace and sanity to the dialogues which are happening in this. Yeah.
Well, and because the UAE is a melting pot of people from all over the world, it brings scientists from all over the world. Exactly. So there's so much to offer.
Yeah, there's so much we can
to
bring
the conversation.
Yeah.
Dr. Aisha, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate your time. Yeah. It was lovely speaking with you.
Thank you. Anytime.
Please tune in for our next episode, where we welcome Dr. Ramia Almari from the Earth Sciences Department and PhD student Omar Al-Danhani, who are going to be here to speak to us about their recent Antarctic expedition. Thank you for tuning in to KU Pulse, and we'll see you next time.